When 8-year-old Amara gives her beloved lavender scarf to a homeless woman on a frigid day, she doesn't expect the ripple effect that follows. Her innocent act of kindness ignites suspicion and prejudice among her peers and neighbors, leading Amara to question the harsh realities of the world. But as the consequences of her actions unfold, a greater truth emerges, one that reveals the power of compassion and the unexpected ways it can come full circle. Will Amara's courage to stand by her kindness change the hearts of those around her, or will the weight of judgment be too much to bear? Before we get started, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more exciting content, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's dive in. Amara's feet skipped over the cracked sidewalk as she clutched her mother's hand. The crisp air of the late afternoon bit gently at her cheeks, turning them a rosy pink. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. It was the time of year when the days seemed to end too quickly, and the cold slipped in early, settling into the bones of anyone left outside too long. Tara, her mother, walked beside her, tired but smiling, her work uniform still neat after a long shift. Amara was used to these walks home, and they were one of her favorite parts of the day. Just her and her mother, sharing quiet moments between school and the busy evening routines. On this particular day, Amara's mood was as light as the fluttering leaves dancing around their feet. She was eager to talk about her day at school, especially her latest art project, a colorful drawing of animals in a jungle, something she was sure her mom would love. But before she could launch into her story, something caught her attention. Sitting near the corner of a small alley, wrapped in a ragged coat, was a woman. Her hair was matted, her skin pale under the grime, and her hands shook as she clutched a torn piece of cloth around her shoulders. She sat there, huddled into herself, her eyes distant and tired, as if she had not slept in days. Amara slowed her pace, her eyes fixed on the woman. It was cold outside, and the woman had no real protection from the elements. "Mom," Amara whispered, tugging gently on Tara's hand. "Look." Tara followed her daughter's gaze, her expression softening into concern. "Come on, sweetheart," she said quietly. "We don't want to bother her." But Amara couldn't tear her eyes away. There was something about the woman that stirred a deep feeling inside her, a mixture of sadness and something else she didn't yet understand. She had seen people like this woman before, people sitting on the edges of sidewalks, often ignored by those walking by, but she had never been this close. For some reason, today felt different. They walked a few steps further before Amara stopped entirely. She let go of her mother's hand and reached up to the scarf wrapped around her neck. It was her favorite scarf, a soft lavender wool piece that her grandmother had knitted for her before she passed away. The scarf held deep sentimental value, a reminder of her grandmother's warm hugs and the soft, comforting smell of lavender. Amara hesitated for a moment, fingers brushing over the soft fabric, before she made up her mind. "Wait, Mom," she said, turning back. Without waiting for a response, Amara walked up to the woman, her small hand clutching the scarf tightly. The woman didn't look up at first. She seemed lost in her own world, shivering as the cold air cut through her thin coat. Amara stood in front of her for a moment, unsure of how to begin. "Excuse me," Amara said softly, her voice trembling just a bit. The woman finally looked up, her eyes unfocused at first, but then they settled on Amara with a faint glimmer of curiosity. She looked surprised to see the little girl standing in front of her, holding out a scarf. "You look cold," Amara said, her voice gaining strength. "This is for you." The woman stared at the scarf for a moment before her gaze shifted to Amara's face. Her eyes were tired, yes, but there was also something else there, something like disbelief. Slowly, she reached out her trembling hand to take the scarf, her fingers brushing against Amara's as she did. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, the woman nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you," she said, her voice rough and raw. Amara smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. "You're welcome." Tara had been watching from a few steps away, her expression a mixture of pride and worry. She had raised Amara to be kind, to see people beyond their circumstances, but the world was not always as kind in return. As Amara walked back to her, Tara knelt down to meet her daughter's eyes. That was very sweet of you, Amara, she said, brushing a stray curl out of Amara's face. But you need to be careful, okay? Not everyone in the world is kind. You don't know what kind of trouble people might be in. Amara frowned slightly, confused. But she was just cold, Mom. She needed help. I know, baby, Tara said softly. And you did a good thing. But the world is more complicated than that. Just promise me you'll be cautious, all right? Amara nodded, though she didn't fully understand. How could being kind be wrong? She had seen someone in need, and she had helped. Wasn't that what she was supposed to do? As they continued their walk home, Amara couldn't stop thinking about the woman. Who was she? What had happened to her? Where did she sleep at night? The questions swirled in her mind, each one growing more urgent as the chilly evening air pressed against them. That night, as Amara lay in bed, wrapped in her blankets, her thoughts returned to the woman. She couldn't shake the image of her sitting alone in the cold, clutching the scarf. Did she have a place to sleep tonight? Would the scarf be enough to keep her warm? Amara hoped so. Far across the town, Evelyn, now wrapped in the lavender scarf, sat under the awning of a closed shop, her back against the cold brick wall. She clutched the scarf to her chest, her fingers running over the soft wool as tears welled up in her eyes. It wasn't just the warmth of the scarf that made her cry. It was the kindness behind it. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone had seen her, really seen her, not just as a homeless woman, but as a person. As the night deepened and the streets grew quiet, Evelyn whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." The next morning, Amara woke up feeling lighter, her thoughts still wrapped around the memory of giving her scarf to the woman. She hoped the scarf had helped. She imagined Evelyn. She had learned the woman's name after asking around that evening, sitting somewhere warm, the soft wool keeping the chill away. As she got ready for school, she glanced at the spot where the scarf usually hung on her door. For a moment, she felt a pang of sadness, missing the warmth it provided her. But then she smiled, thinking of how much more Evelyn needed it. "Are you ready, honey?" Tara's voice came from the kitchen, where she was packing Amara's lunch. Amara nodded, grabbed her school bag, and hurried out the door, eager to share her day with her friends. School, however, didn't unfold as she had expected. By the time lunch came around, it seemed like everyone knew about the scarf. It wasn't unusual for the neighborhood to buzz with news, but Amara hadn't thought her small act of kindness would become the subject of discussion. "Hey, Amara!" One of her classmates, Jordan, called out as she walked toward the lunch tables. "Is it true you gave your scarf to some homeless woman?" Amara blinked, taken aback. "Yeah, why?" Jordan shrugged but exchanged a look with another girl sitting beside him, Layla. "That's kinda weird, don't you think?" Amara frowned. "Weird? Why is it weird?" Layla chimed in, her tone a little sharper. "I don't know, she could be dangerous. My mom says people like that are usually in trouble for a reason. She could be crazy or something." Amara's heart sank. She had been expecting smiles, maybe even praise, but instead there was confusion and suspicion. "She wasn't dangerous," Amara said firmly. "She was just cold." Layla rolled her eyes. "You don't know that. My dad says homeless people are usually out there because they've done something wrong. You shouldn't trust them." Amara's stomach tightened. She wasn't sure how to respond. All she knew was that the woman she met, Evelyn, hadn't seemed dangerous at all. She had seemed sad, lonely and cold, but not dangerous. And yet, her friends were already making judgments, their minds filled with warnings and whispers they had heard at home. The conversation hung over her like a cloud for the rest of the day. Every time she tried to focus in class, her mind wandered back to the comments Layla and Jordan had made. Why did people think like that? Just because someone was homeless, did that really mean they were bad? At recess, as Amara sat alone on a bench, she overheard more whispers. Kids who had been her friends just yesterday were now talking behind her back. "She gave it to a homeless lady. I heard her mom wasn't happy about it." "Why would anyone do that? What if that woman is dangerous? Maybe she's just trying to show off." The words stung more than Amara wanted to admit. She clenched her fists in her lap, trying to hold back the tears. She didn't understand why people were being so mean. She had just wanted to help. That was all. By the time the final bell rang, Amara felt deflated. She rushed out of the school as fast as she could, Not wanting to deal with any more comments or sideways glances, Tara was waiting for her outside, the same warm smile on her face as always, but Amara didn't return it this time. She felt like a balloon that had been pricked and was slowly deflating, losing all its joy. "How was school today, sweetie?" Tara asked as they started walking home. Amara shrugged, kicking a small rock on the sidewalk. "Fine." Tara raised an eyebrow, sensing that something was wrong. "Just fine? That doesn't sound like you." For a moment, Amara didn't say anything. She didn't want to burden her mom with her problems, especially when her mother already had so much to worry about. But the weight of the day's events became too heavy, and the words spilled out before she could stop them. "Everyone's saying I was dumb for giving the scarf to that woman," Amara blurted. "They think she's dangerous. They're saying mean things about her and about me." Tara listened quietly, her heart aching for her daughter. She had always known that the world could be cruel, especially when it came to people's prejudices, but hearing it affect her daughter so directly filled her with a deep sadness. "They don't understand, honey," Tara said softly. "Sometimes people judge others because they don't know their stories. It's easier to make assumptions than to take the time to understand." "But why?" Amara asked, her voice trembling. "Why does it have to be like that? She wasn't dangerous. She just needed help." Tara sighed, stopping to kneel down in front of Amara. She placed her hands gently on her daughter's shoulders, looking into her eyes. "You did something kind, Amara. Not everyone will understand that, but that doesn't mean you did the wrong thing." Amara sniffled, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I just wanted to help." "I know," Tara said, pulling her into a hug. "And that's what makes you special. Not everyone is brave enough to be kind, especially when others don't understand. But you are." They stood like that for a moment, mother and daughter, wrapped in an embrace that felt like a shield against the world's harsh judgments. Tara hoped that her words would help, but she knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy for Amara. This was just the beginning of the lessons she would learn about how people viewed the world. Their quiet moment was interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Tara looked up to see two uniformed police officers walking towards them. Her body tensed instinctively, though she kept her face neutral. She wasn't sure why they were approaching, but experience had taught her to be cautious. "Excuse me," one of the officers said politely. "Are you Tara?" Tara nodded, standing up straight and holding Amara's hand protectively. "Yes, that's me. Is something wrong?" The officer exchanged a quick glance with his partner before answering. "We're just following up on a report we received. It seems there was a homeless woman seen in the area last night. Some neighbors were concerned. Do you happen to know anything about that?" Tara's heart sank. She had known this was coming. In a neighborhood like theirs, people often viewed the presence of homeless individuals as a threat, regardless of the circumstances. She glanced down at Amara, who was looking up at her with wide eyes, her small hand tightening in Tara's grip. "We saw her," Tara said carefully. "My daughter gave her a scarf. She didn't seem like she was causing any trouble." The officer nodded, making a note in his pad. "We've had some complaints about loitering, and we're just trying to make sure everything's under control. Do you know where she might have gone?" Tara shook her head. "No, we haven't seen her since yesterday." The officers exchanged another glance before the first one nodded. "All right, ma'am. Thanks for your time. We'll be keeping an eye out." As they walked away, Tara felt a knot of anger rise in her chest. It wasn't fair. The woman hadn't done anything wrong, but now she was being treated like a criminal simply for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. Tara looked down at Amara, who was still watching the officers walk away. "Is she in trouble?" Amara asked softly. Tara shook her head. "No, baby, she's not in trouble. But sometimes people make things more complicated than they need to be." They walked home in silence after that, the weight of the world pressing down on both of them. Tara knew that this was just one of many difficult conversations they would have about the way people viewed others who were different. But she wished it didn't have to happen so soon. Later that night, as Amara lay in bed, she stared up at the ceiling, her mind replaying the events of the day. She thought about her friends, the whispers, the looks, and the police officers. It all felt like a heavy storm cloud hanging over her. dark and confusing. But amid all that confusion, one thing remained clear in her heart. She had done the right thing. And no matter what anyone said, she wasn't going to let their words change that. The days that followed were not kind to Amara. The feeling of unease that had started after her encounter with Evelyn only deepened. At school, the whispers hadn't stopped. In fact, they had grown louder. What had begun as a few offhand remarks had snowballed into full conversations behind her back. Each time she passed a group of kids, she felt their eyes on her, heard the faint murmurs as they leaned in closer to each other. "That's her. She's the one who gave her scarf to that homeless lady. I don't get it. Why would anyone do that? Maybe she's just trying to make herself look good. You know, like for attention." Amara kept her head down, trying to block out the words, but it was impossible. The words clung to her, heavy and cold like the winter air. What hurt the most was the distance growing between her and some of her closest friends. People she had played with, laughed with, were now treating her like she had done something wrong. It was during lunch that things came to a head. Amara was sitting at her usual spot, picking at her food, when Lena, one of her closest friends, approached the table. There was a time when Amara would have smiled at the sight of her, but now her heart sank. Lena's expression wasn't one of friendliness. "Amara," Lena began, her voice unusually cold. "Why are you hanging out with people like that?" Amara looked up, confused. "People like who?" "You know, that homeless woman. Why would you give her your scarf? My mom says you should be careful around people like that. You don't know what they've done. She might be dangerous." There it was again, dangerous. That word had been following her all week, like a shadow. It didn't make sense to Amara. How could someone like Evelyn, who had seemed so sad and vulnerable, be dangerous? She had done nothing wrong, yet everyone was treating her like a villain. "I was just trying to help her," Amara said quietly, her voice trembling. Lena folded her arms, her brow furrowed in confusion. "But why? You don't even know her. People like her end up on the streets for a reason." Amara felt her throat tighten. She wanted to shout that it wasn't true, that Evelyn wasn't people like that. But the words got stuck, tangled in her frustration and confusion. She didn't understand why her friends couldn't see what she had seen, that Evelyn was just a person in need, someone who had been dealt a hard hand in life. Why did everyone else seem to think it was more complicated than that? Lena's tone softened slightly, as if she thought she was helping. "You just have to be careful, Amara. You never know. My parents say people like that have done bad things, or they might be sick or something. You don't want to get caught up in all that." Amara stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the cafeteria floor. "She's not like that." The words came out louder than she had intended, and suddenly, all eyes in the cafeteria were on her. Her face flushed with embarrassment, but she couldn't stop now. She wasn't dangerous. She was just cold and needed help. Why can't anyone understand that? Lena took a step back, startled by Amara's outburst. "I'm just trying to help you," she mumbled, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. "You don't have to get mad." Amara didn't say anything more. She grabbed her lunch tray and walked quickly toward the trash cans, dumping the untouched food into the bin before heading out of the cafeteria. Her heart was racing, her chest tight with a mix of anger and sadness. She didn't want to be mad at Lena, or anyone else for that matter. But she couldn't shake the feeling that no one understood her. Outside, the air was crisp and biting. Amara sat on a bench near the playground, watching the clouds pass by, her thoughts heavy. She thought about Evelyn, and wondered where she was now. Had she found somewhere safe to sleep? Was she okay? The thought of Evelyn still out there, cold and alone, made Amara's heart ache. Later that afternoon, when Amara got home, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through some paperwork. Tara looked up as Amara walked in, her face softening into a smile, but the smile faded when she saw the expression on her daughter's face. "Rough day?" Tara asked gently. Amara nodded, slipping into the chair across from her mother. "It's not fair, Mom," she said, her voice small. "Why does everyone think I did something wrong? I was just trying to help." Tara sighed and put down her paperwork. She reached across the table, taking Amara's hand in hers. "People are afraid of what they don't understand," she said softly. It's easier for them to believe that someone who's different from them is dangerous, rather than taking the time to understand what's really going on. But that's not fair, Amara insisted. Evelyn didn't do anything wrong. She was just unlucky. Why can't people see that? Tara's heart ached at the frustration in her daughter's voice. She had asked herself the same questions many times throughout her life. Why did people assume the worst about others? Why was it so hard for them to see the humanity in someone who was struggling? I know it's not fair, Tara said gently. But that's why what you did matters so much. You saw her for who she really is, not for what the world wants to believe about her. That's something special, Amara. Not everyone has that kind of compassion. Amara felt a small flicker of warmth in her chest at her mother's words, but it was quickly overshadowed by the heaviness of the day. I just want people to stop judging her, she said quietly, and stop judging me. Tara squeezed her hand, her voice soft and comforting. It's not easy to change people's minds, sweetheart. But what you did, it made a difference. Maybe not to the people around you right now, but to Evelyn. You helped her when no one else would, and that's something no one can take away from you. The weight of those words settled over Amara like a warm blanket. She still felt the sting of her friend's judgment, but her mother's reassurance brought a small sense of peace. It wasn't easy being different, especially when others couldn't understand, but maybe it was okay. Maybe, in some way, she had done more good than she realized. The days continued to pass, and though the whispers at school didn't stop entirely, Amara started to care a little less. Her mother's words had given her strength, a reminder that the kindness she had shown wasn't for the approval of others. It was for Evelyn, and that was enough. One afternoon, Amara's thoughts returned to Evelyn. She still didn't know what had happened to her, and the uncertainty gnawed at her. She decided to talk to her mother about it. Mom, Amara said as they sat down for dinner one evening, do you think Evelyn is okay? Do you think we could try to find her? Tara paused, her fork halfway to her mouth. She had been thinking the same thing, but hadn't wanted to bring it up in case it upset Amara. We can try, Tara said slowly, but we have to be careful. We don't know where she might be. Amara's face lit up with hope. Can we go back to where we saw her last? Maybe she's still around there. Tara hesitated for a moment. She didn't want to give Amara false hope, but she also didn't want to discourage her daughter's compassion. All right, she said finally. We'll go look tomorrow after school. The next day, as promised, they walked back to the spot where they had first seen Evelyn. The streets were just as cold and gray as they had been that day, and the wind bit at their skin as they walked. Amara scanned every corner, every alley, hoping for a glimpse of the woman she had helped. But there was no sign of her. Disappointed, Amara looked up at her mother. What if we never find her? Tara smiled softly. Even if we don't, you still did something good, and that matters. Amara nodded, though the disappointment still lingered. Before they left, Tara reached into her bag and pulled out a small package, a bottle of water, some food, and a warm blanket. Let's leave this here, just in case she comes back. Amara helped her mother place the package near the spot where Evelyn had been sitting. As they walked home, Amara felt a sense of quiet resolve settle over her. She didn't know if they would ever find Evelyn, but she had done what she could. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. A few weeks had passed since Amara and Tara had left the care package for Evelyn. The cold had settled in even more fiercely, and with each passing day, Amara found herself wondering about Evelyn's fate. Had she found the package? Was she still in the area? These thoughts lingered in Amara's mind as the days stretched on, a quiet concern that never really went away. At school, things had improved slightly. The whispers weren't as frequent, and the sting of judgment had dulled, though it hadn't disappeared entirely. Some classmates still gave her strange looks, and others kept their distance, but Amara had learned to live with it. Her mother's reassurances and her own resolve had helped her weather the storm of criticism. Still, there was an emptiness in her heart. She couldn't shake the feeling that her act of kindness wasn't complete. There was still unfinished business with Evelyn. It was a cold, gray afternoon when the unexpected happened. Amara had just been picked up from school by Tara, and they were walking their usual route home, the sidewalk familiar beneath their feet. The cold nipped at their skin, but they moved quickly, eager to escape the biting wind. As they turned the corner onto their street, Amara saw something, or rather someone, that made her heart skip a beat. There, standing just a few houses away from their own, was Evelyn. Amara stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening. She could hardly believe it. Evelyn looked different, cleaner, her hair combed back, and though her clothes were still worn, there was a noticeable improvement in her appearance. She wasn't huddled in the cold, shivering like before. Instead, she stood tall, her eyes scanning the street nervously, as though she wasn't quite sure she belonged there. "Mom?" Amara gasped, tugging on Tara's hand. "It's her! It's Evelyn!" Tara followed Amara's gaze, and her breath caught in her throat. She, too, recognized the woman immediately, though it took her a moment to process the change in her appearance. Evelyn looked stronger, more composed. There was still a vulnerability to her, but she no longer seemed as lost as she had the day they'd first met. Without hesitation, Amara let go of her mother's hand and ran toward Evelyn, her heart pounding with a mix of excitement and relief. "Evelyn!" she called out, her voice ringing through the quiet street. Evelyn turned at the sound of her name, her eyes widening as she saw the little girl running toward her. For a moment, she looked uncertain, almost as if she didn't recognize Amara. But then a soft smile spread across her face, a smile that seemed to carry both gratitude and relief. "Amara," Evelyn said softly, her voice hoarse but filled with warmth. "You remember me?" "Of course I do," Amara said, reaching her side. "I've been thinking about you a lot. Are you okay? Did you find the scarf helpful? And the package? Did you find that too?" Evelyn chuckled softly, the sound tinged with sadness but also a kind of quiet joy. "Yes, I found the package. Thank you. The scarf, it saved me on a night I didn't think I'd make it through. You have no idea how much that meant to me." By this time, Tara had caught up to them, her eyes filled with cautious empathy. "Evelyn," she said gently, "it's good to see you again. How are you holding up?" Evelyn glanced at Tara, her expression softening even more. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, something like recognition, as though she had been expecting this moment for a while. "I'm doing better," she said, her voice still quiet but steady. "Better than I've been in a long time, thanks to you two." Amara beamed, but she couldn't help the questions that still swirled in her mind. "What happened? Where did you go? We tried to find you after we gave you the scarf, but you weren't there." Evelyn sighed, her breath visible in the cold air. "It's a long story, sweetheart. I've been moving around a lot, trying to find somewhere safe. But that night, when you gave me the scarf, it changed something in me. It gave me hope." Her voice cracked slightly, and she paused to collect herself. "I found my way to a shelter not too far from here. They helped me get cleaned up, gave me a place to stay for a few nights. I've been going from place to place since then, but it's been hard." Tara listened intently, her heart aching for Evelyn. "I'm glad you found somewhere safe, even if it's temporary. Have you been able to get in touch with any services that can help you long-term?" Evelyn nodded slowly, though there was still a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I've spoken to some people at the shelter. They've put me on a list for housing assistance, but it's a long process. In the meantime, I'm just trying to get by." Amara's heart sank a little at the mention of the long process. It wasn't fair. Evelyn deserved more than this, more than just getting by. But before she could say anything, Tara spoke again, her voice firm but kind. "Evelyn, if there's anything we can do to help you, please let us know. I'm not sure what we can offer, but we'll try." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears, though she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. "You've already done more than enough. You gave me hope when I had none left. That's something I'll never forget." For a moment, the three of them stood there in the cold, the weight of their shared experiences hanging in the air. Amara, ever the optimist, couldn't help but feel like this was a turning point, not just for Evelyn, but for herself and her mother as well. Finally, Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled something out. A familiar piece of lavender wool. It was the scarf. The same one Amara had given her on that cold day weeks ago. "I've kept this with me ever since you gave it to me," Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. "It reminded me that there's still kindness in the world, even when it feels like everything is falling apart." Amara's eyes widened as she looked at the scarf. It was worn now, its edges frayed from weeks of use, but it still held the same warmth it had the day she had given it away. "You can keep it," Amara said softly. "It's yours now." But Evelyn shook her head and smiled, though tears still glistened in her eyes. "No, sweetheart, this scarf gave me what I needed when I had nothing. Now it's time for me to pass it on." She held the scarf out to Amara, her hands trembling slightly. "You were right. Kindness is a gift, and it's meant to be shared." Amara hesitated for a moment, then took the scarf gently from Evelyn's hands. It felt different now, heavier, almost, as though it carried not just warmth, but the weight of everything Evelyn had been through. She wrapped it around her neck, the familiar softness brushing against her skin. "Thank you," Amara whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. Evelyn smiled, though the sadness in her eyes hadn't completely faded. "No, thank you." Tara cleared her throat, her own emotions threatening to spill over. "Evelyn," she said softly, "I know the road ahead might still be difficult, but you don't have to face it alone. We'll help you however we can." Evelyn looked at Tara, her expression a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "I appreciate that," she said quietly, "but I don't want to be a burden. You've already done so much." "You're not a burden," Tara replied firmly. "No one is a burden just because they need help." For the first time, Evelyn looked as though she might actually believe those words. She nodded, her eyes misty once more. "Thank you." As they said their goodbyes and watched Evelyn walk away, Amara felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, and hope all wrapped up together. She knew that Evelyn's journey wasn't over, but for the first time, she felt like things might actually get better. As they walked home, Amara reached up and touched the scarf around her neck. It felt different now, more than just a piece of fabric. It was a reminder of everything that had happened, of the power of kindness, and of the fact that, sometimes, even the smallest acts could change a person's life. "Mom," Amara said quietly as they neared their house, "I'm glad we found her." Tara smiled, her eyes shining with pride. "So am I, sweetheart. So am I." That night, as Amara lay in bed, she thought about Evelyn. About the woman who had taught her more about kindness and strength than she could have ever imagined. She didn't know what the future held for Evelyn, but she knew one thing for sure. They had made a difference in each other's lives. And that was something no one could take away. Weeks passed after Amara and Tara's reunion with Evelyn. The cold winter days stretched long, but something felt different now. A new sense of warmth that had little to do with the temperature outside. Evelyn had found a path, one filled with uncertainty, but also with a renewed sense of purpose. Amara often thought about her, wondering how she was doing, but she carried the knowledge that she had helped in a way that no one else had, and that made her heart feel lighter. At school, things began to shift, though not in the way Amara expected. The whispers that had followed her after her act of kindness gradually died down, though not everyone was quick to forget. Some students still kept their distance, their minds too closed off by the prejudices they had learned at home. But there were others, like Jordan and a few of her other classmates, who had softened. They didn't say much, but the silence was no longer filled with judgment. It was as though her simple act had left some of them questioning their own assumptions. One day during recess, Amara sat on the same bench she had always sat on, her eyes drifting toward the cloudy sky above. The chill in the air wasn't as biting now, but there was still a coldness that clung to the world. A remnant of the long winter. She pulled the lavender scarf tighter around her neck, finding comfort in its softness. It had come full circle. This scarf, a gift given, lost and returned, much like the kindness it represented. As Amara sat, lost in thought, a familiar figure caught her attention. Lena, the girl who had once been one of Amara's closest friends but who had distanced herself after the incident with Evelyn, was sitting alone at a table near the playground. Something about her posture seemed off. Her shoulders were hunched, her head down, and she was picking at her lunch without much enthusiasm. Amara hadn't spoken much to Lena since that day in the cafeteria, when Lena had questioned her decision to help Evelyn. Their friendship had never quite recovered, and though Amara had moved on, there was still a small part of her that missed the connection they once had. Curiosity tugged at her, and Amara decided to approach. She wasn't sure what she would say, but the sight of Lena sitting alone made her heart ache in a way she couldn't ignore. As she walked over, Lena didn't look up, not until Amara was standing directly in front of her. "Hey," Amara said softly, trying to keep her voice neutral. Lena looked up, startled. Her eyes were red as though she had been crying, and her face was pale. She quickly wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. "Oh, hi, Amara," she muttered, her voice thick with emotion. Amara stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. This wasn't the Lena she was used to, the confident, sometimes sharp-tongued girl who always had something to say. Something was wrong, and Amara's instinct to help kicked in almost immediately. "Are you okay?" Amara asked gently, sitting down across from her. Lena shook her head, her lips trembling. She looked like she was trying to hold it together, but she was failing. "No, not really," she whispered, her voice breaking. Amara waited, giving Lena the space to speak if she wanted to. After a few moments of silence, Lena took a shaky breath and began to talk. "It's my dad," she said quietly, her eyes cast downward. "He lost his job a few weeks ago. My parents have been fighting a lot, and I don't know. Everything just feels like it's falling apart." Amara's heart sank. She hadn't known any of this. Lena had always seemed so put together, so sure of herself, but now Amara could see the cracks in the facade. The weight of her family's troubles had clearly taken a toll on her. "I'm really sorry, Lena," Amara said sincerely. "That sounds really hard." Lena sniffled and wiped her nose with the back of her hand. "Yeah, it is. And now, I'm scared we might lose our house. My mom says it won't happen, but I can hear them talking about it at night. It's like everything's out of control, and there's nothing I can do." Amara understood that feeling all too well. The sense of helplessness, of being swept up in something bigger than yourself. She had felt it when people at school had started treating her differently because of Evelyn. And she had felt it when she saw how the world judged people who were struggling, just like Lena's family now was. "I don't know what to do," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "I feel like I'm losing everything." Amara reached out, placing her hand gently on Lena's arm. "You're not losing everything," she said softly. "I'm still here, and so are your parents. Things might be hard right now, but that doesn't mean they'll stay that way forever." Lena looked up, her eyes glistening with fresh tears. "But what if they do? What if we end up like that woman you helped?" There it was. The fear that had been lurking beneath the surface, the fear that had driven Lena to question Amara's act of kindness. She wasn't just afraid of the woman Amara had helped, she was afraid of becoming her. The thought that her family could lose everything, that she could end up in the same situation as Evelyn, had been eating away at her all along. Amara squeezed Lena's arm gently, her heart filled with empathy. "I understand why you're scared," she said softly. "But even if things get really hard, it doesn't mean you're going to lose everything. There are people who can help, and you're not alone." Lena stared at Amara for a long moment, her expression a mixture of confusion and relief. "How can you be so sure?" Amara thought about Evelyn, about the journey she had been on and the help she had finally received. She thought about how Tara had stepped in to help Evelyn navigate the complicated world of social services, and how Evelyn had started to rebuild her life, piece by piece. "Because I've seen what happens when people help each other," Amara said with quiet confidence. "When things are hard, kindness can make all the difference. Just like it did for Evelyn." Lena blinked, her tears slowing. Do you really believe that?" "I do," Amara said firmly. "And if things get really bad, I'll be here to help you too." For a moment Lena didn't say anything. Then, slowly, she nodded, her expression softening. "I'm sorry, Amara," she whispered. "I didn't understand before. I didn't know what it felt like to be scared like that. I shouldn't have judged you." Amara smiled gently, her heart filled with warmth. "It's okay. I'm just glad we can talk about it now." The two girls sat there in silence for a while, the weight of their conversation hanging between them. It wasn't a quick fix, and Amara knew that Lena's family was still facing a difficult road ahead. But in that moment, they had found something important: understanding. And with that understanding came the possibility of healing. In the days that followed, Lena slowly began to reconnect with Amara. Their friendship, once strained by misunderstanding and fear, started to rebuild itself. It wasn't the same as before. There was a new depth to it now, a shared experience that made their bond stronger. Meanwhile, Evelyn's situation continued to improve. Thanks to Tara's help and the connections she had made at the shelter, Evelyn was able to secure temporary housing through a nonprofit organization that specialized in helping people transition out of homelessness. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but it was a victory nonetheless. One Saturday afternoon, Amara, Tara, and Evelyn met up at a park not far from their neighborhood. The sun was out, shining brightly despite the lingering chill in the air, and the three of them sat together on a bench, watching as children played on the swings and slides nearby. Evelyn looked different now. There was a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a quiet strength that spoke of resilience. She had come a long way from the woman they had first met on that cold sidewalk, and though her journey was far from over, she was standing tall, ready to face whatever challenges came next. As they talked and laughed, Amara found herself glancing down at the scarf wrapped around her neck. It felt like more than just a piece of fabric now. It was a symbol of everything they had been through together. The scarf had traveled from her to Evelyn and back again, and in doing so, it had carried with it the warmth of kindness, the strength of compassion, and the power of hope. At one point, Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a small handmade bracelet, woven with threads of lavender, white, and green. She handed it to Amara with a smile. "I made this for you," she said softly, "to thank you for everything. It's not much, but I wanted you to have something to remind you that kindness comes full circle." Amara's heart swelled with emotion as she took the bracelet and slipped it onto her wrist. "Thank you, Evelyn," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "I'll keep it forever." As they sat there together, the sun casting long shadows across the park, Amara felt a deep sense of peace. She had learned so much over the past few weeks, about kindness, about judgment, and about the power of empathy. And in the end, it wasn't just Evelyn's life that had changed. Amara's had too. What they gave, whether it was a scarf, a kind word, or a simple act of understanding, had come back to them in ways they never could have imagined. It was karma's circle, and it was beautiful. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Click on the video now to watch. We appreciate your support, and we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments.